You are now tuned in to 710 Radio. We are the newest and hottest independent radio station in Colorado and on the internet. The fans named the station. With over 1 million visitors and over 10 million hits. Oh yeah, our website is going bananas. We are the newest and the hottest. This is 710 Radio. 24/7 radio. Stay tuned and tell a friend. The Dabber's Choice. With hot shows 7 days a week.
Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team fucking here. Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now
The following program is intended to educate and inform. We discuss cannabis being used as medicine, the culture, science, and controversy of cannabis and cannabis laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity. Moth Networks and their associates do not claim to be lawyers or doctors, nor do they represent themselves as such. All their comments and views are of their own personal opinion and personal experiences. Opinions and claims made by the guests and advertisers on Moth Networks are their own, and all parties agree to the Moth Network use and policy agreement. Moth Network and Moth Network associates cannot be held legally responsible for the statements of the host or of their guests. We encourage all listeners to learn their constitution, to assert their rights, acknowledge their duties, and know their individual state laws.
Hi, this is Kim Mateo. Thanks for joining me on Kingdom Healing. The last two shows I covered the digestive tract and the elimination system, and we talked about the stomach and the small intestines and the large intestines. Today I want to talk about the central nervous system, which consists of the brain, the spinal column, the sympathetic nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system. But one thing I want to back up a little bit on is, with the small intestine and the large intestine, we hear so much about 70% of our immune system occurs in the intestinal tract. And I'll be doing a show specifically on the immune system and the organs that are involved, which are the tonsils and the appendix. It's part of the immune system. And but I wanted to mention in the small intestine, down at the very bottom part, there are lymph nodes there that is called the Peyer's patch, and that is where the that is where things are absorbed and taken into the immune system. So we'll talk more about the Peyer's patch as well when I do next week's show on the immune system, and then the following show after that will be on the glandular system. But today I want to talk about the central nervous system. And, that's our computer system. It controls absolutely everything. All of our voluntary and involuntary activities of the body, has to do with the nervous system. The nerves are divided into two major branches. There is the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The central nervous system manages sensory input and it directs voluntary muscle movement. The autonomic nervous system, that controls all of the automatic processes of the body. breathing, heartbeat, digestive system to work, blinking your eyes. That all has to do with the autonomic nervous system. Since the system is so complex, we'll look at it in sections. So, number one, the brain. It's the center of the nervous system. It weighs approximately 3 pounds, and it contains about 10 billion nerve cells.
Wow.
One thing I want to point out is in every nerve bundle, there are over 3,500 nerves inside of one nerve bundle.
So what do you mean by nerve bundle?
When, say, when you look at the nerve bundle branch that, say, comes down the side of the neck and it diffuses out over, into the muscles, and so that
Okay.
you move your arm and lift your arm and all of that. That webbing of those nerves, each strand of that nerve inside of that nerve has 3,500, over 3,500 nerves inside of that.
Wow.
So that's why, things can be so seriously complicated when you sever a nerve. And if it's not taken care of immediately, that atrophies, that nerve dies, and you don't ever end up with use of whatever area has been involved where that nerve is severed. So it's just like if someone, say, the C1 vertebrae. The C1 vertebrae is that top vertebrae. Above that is the axis, and the atlas is on the top. So you've got your atlas and axis that literally the skull sits on.
Okay.
Then right immediately below that vertebrae is your C1 vertebrae.
Okay.
And usually, if anything happens with that C1 or the C2 vertebrae, usually it results in death.
Because isn't that where the brainstem is?
Yes,
is it not?
That's up at the top.
And that's just all you got to do is tap that, and someone can die.
Yes.
Just tap it.
Yes.
Okay.
And a chipped or a broken C1 vertebrae, if you survive it, there's highly probable chance that you're quadriplegic.
Wow.
So the higher up the brain stem, starting at the top, working its way down, it's far more serious for an injury to occur at that top part of the spinal column.
Wow.
Where the actual skull sits on the top of the spine. Okay? So, the farther down the spine, the less chances of like a quadriplegic situation. But you still can get into a paraplegic, where you have two, where your legs don't function again.
Right.
But a quadriplegic, when it's up high, will involve your arms and your legs.
Yeah,
as
because
well.
I was, when I ruptured L2 down to S2.
Or S1.
That was my tailbone as well. That I
it's- yeah.
They, I was lucky that it blew the way that it did.
Oh, yeah.
And the second time when I broke it, I was lucky that it blew in the same spot, the same way. It's not lucky breaking
It's
it
not
the
lucky,
second
but it
time,
was-
but it was
it
lucky
was
because
lucky from-
I've had other friends
yeah.
that had the same injury as me, but they're in wheelchairs. Just
Yeah.
because it blew the other way. So I mean, I felt very fortunate. Very lucky that. I mean,
Uh-huh.
the first time I did break my back, it took me a long time to learn how to walk again, but
Yeah.
I made it,
Yeah.
which I can't say that for some people that I know.
Yeah, because the C1, your spinal column, in between the vertebrae is all these nerve endings. And those nerve endings go to specific areas of the body. So, for instance, the C1, that C1 vertebrae has everything to do with blood supply to the head, to the pituitary gland, to the scalp, to the bones of the face, nerve supply to the brain, to the inner and middle ear, and to the sympathetic nervous system. And if you've got a problem with that, say that it's not, broken or injured, but a pinching off of that. Say like, your neck always feels like, it needs adjusted. It drives me crazy to see people, throw their head to each side, and snap everything. You need to see a chiropractor. And you shouldn't be doing that. You see people where they will lean forward and, put the palm of their hand in their chin, and they'll twist their head off to one side to the other. And yes, you'll hear a pop, and it does free up. It does free up that nerve supply flow because, when your neck is feeling like that, maybe you've got a headache.
Sure.
Maybe your eyes are bothering you. You're feeling really nervous. I mean, the C1's got to do with headaches, nervousness, insomnia, high blood pressure, migraine headaches, dizziness, chronic tiredness. That's why it's really important that you find a really good chiropractor. I mean, in Denver, my favorite guy is Dr. Chuck Sanesteven, and he's down on South Gaylord. And he's not only a chiropractor, but he's also an acupuncturist. And he taught at the acupuncture school, 25 years ago.
Wow. So he's had
He's-
plenty of experience.
He's really good. And I had a broadside car accident in 91. And I only went to a chiropractor that was up the street from my home only for convenience, because my hip was in such bad shape that I couldn't tolerate driving or riding in the car. I didn't want to drive from Arvada down into Denver. And so after, this chiropractor that I was working with, eventually he was offered a job as an Olympics chiropractor, and I was really shocked by all of that because he really was pretty lousy. He really was. He was probably the lousiest chiropractor I ever went to.
Wow.
So it's it's all in who you know.
Right.
It's who you know. And so finally when he took that job, I really had no choice. But at that point he also told me, he said, oh, look, this is as good as it's going to get. You really should just do the hip replacement. And this was 1991.
Wow.
And he says, do the hip replacement, and once you get through with physical therapy and all of that, you'll be good to go. And it was like, are you kidding me?
Right.
I mean, as young as I was in my early 30s, it's like,
Heck no.
I am not going under the knife. I am not going to have a hip replacement. And I went to him for about 3.5 years.
Wow.
And I limped really, really bad. I don't have any limping.
No?
No,
Couldn't tell?
Oh, no, I don't have any limping. And so finally when he said, that's as good as you're going to get, you know, you need to have the surgery, blah, 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 I finally called my friend. And it was like, okay, I'm to a point where I can drive down to you. But, you know, this is what this guy said. And I'm not doing that. And so I started working with my friend, and, you know, he was doing the adjustments and doing a lot of acupuncture. And within about 6 months, there was just such an incredible improvement that, he ordered an MRI, and my God, what had happened was the cartilage that had been all torn away from the inside of that hip socket had all reattached. And I had perfect spacing between the left traumatized hip socket and the right hip socket. And so it was really incredible. 6 months working with my friend made over the top all the difference that this other chiropractor wasn't able to accomplish in like 3.5 years.
Wow.
And I had a really bad fall 11 years ago, a couple of days after my brother's funeral. And, you know, all the ice was melting, and it was dark, and I was meeting my sister-in-law's family before they went back to Arizona. They were all in town for the funeral. And it was dark, it was icy. I come around the corner of this building of this restaurant, and from all of the ice melting, there was all kinds of cement that was heaved underneath all of that water. I couldn't see that. And, you know, there should have been some kind of a caution thing out there. I mean, the owners of the restaurant knew that their cement was a nightmare there. And so as I kind of, with some momentum, because I'm running late, you know, some momentum coming around that corner, hurrying, and then stepped into all of this hole with all this heaved cement that was all covered in water. You know, I lost my footing in trying to stabilize with my other leg. Well, all I did was step on some more that was covered up, that was heaved, and I went kersplat.
Ow.
Flying.
Ow.
And I don't usually go to the emergency room, but about an hour later, it was like, you know what? I think I need to go to the ER. I think I broke my knee. Well, you know, of course it wasn't broken, and blah, blah, blah. And I get back home down to the Lake of the Ozarks, and, you know, I'm just not walking too well. My leg is killing me. My knee is killing me. And so, you know, I go to a chiropractor down there, and that didn't help. So finally I went to an orthopedic doctor. He referred me up to an orthopedic surgeon. You know, and she wanted to do surgery, and it was like, I'm not doing surgery. So I went through physical therapy, paid for it out of my own pocket. Did physical therapy it was excruciatingly painful. Did that for about 6-8 months. I still wasn't walking. It was horrible. The pain in my leg was horrible. I had it. So I called my friend, and it's like, you know what? I'm driving myself to Colorado. And I drove 850 miles.
Wow. Made a hell
Got
of a
to my
trip.
appointment with him. He came in every day for a week, did acupuncture and adjustments as needed. But when I showed up there, it was like, you know, the good leg up a step, and then, you know, holding onto the railing, and, you know, get the bad leg there to support me, and then lift the good leg up, you know, one step at a time.
Right.
Do you know that the first thing that he did when I gave him the x-rays that I had, He could not believe it. He put it up in the light box and he said, "Do you see this right here?" He's pointing it out and it's like, "Yeah, I do. I see that." He said, "Your knee is dislocated."
Wow.
He said, "You have gone to a chiropractor and an orthopedic doctor and a surgeon, and you have had all of this physical therapy, grinding bone on bone.
Oh, man.
You have a dislocated knee.
Oh, my goodness.
Your leg's dislocated."
Oh.
You know, that was the first thing that he did after putting the x-rays up in the light box. And he says, "This is going to hurt. Take a deep breath." He pulled on my leg, pulled it outward. And, there was this loud noise. And I stood up. And I could put pressure on that leg.
Wow.
8.5 months. 8.5 months of an absolute, horrifically painful nightmare that I had to drive 850 miles for my buddy, Dr. Chuck Santasteven, to fix my leg.
Wow.
And here they're talking surgery, and I'm not doing that. Okay, physical therapy. It's like, you know what that cost me?
I bet.
The excruciating
thousands of dollars,
pain.
I bet, from all the different doctors.
Exactly, And so what he was coming in, I came every day for, and the acupuncture and some other treatments and stuff, was to try to heal all of that irritation that had been rubbing and scraping and stuff. And so, that leg is, it's really, it's pretty good. I can't bend it back all the way back like I can my left leg. I can get it pretty far, with the right, but it has, there's a little bit there where, I can't get it as far as the left leg. And that's from just all of that bone damage and stuff that was done from trying to walk and physical therapy and follow through with physical therapy. And I'm starting to think like, wow, is this like stuff all in my head? I mean, I've got all these people going, we don't know what's wrong with you. It's just perfectly fine. It's like, no, you're all a pack of idiots.
Right? Yeah, I mean, that's what it came down to.
You were all a pack of idiots.
Right? At the end of the day, that's what it was.
And what was really nice, my friend felt so bad. I mean, he didn't charge me a penny.
Oh, my goodness.
He didn't charge me
how cool is that?
He didn't charge me a penny. It was like,
and that's a hell of a testimonial.
You have got to be kidding me, that you have gone through all of this, and that's what it was. And it was right there. And when he pointed it out and showed it to me, it was like, yes, I can see that it's misaligned.
Wow.
Says, yeah, it's dislocated. So he fixed me up, and a week later I drove home. I kind of wanted to go walking into a few offices.
I bet.
But I didn't. It's too small of a community. I didn't. Yeah. So, So chiropractors, find a chiropractor that, there's people out there still to this day that have mixed feelings about chiropractors. But I'll tell you what, I grew up with, my father would always go to a chiropractor.
My mom does, religiously.
We had an incident when I was probably about 12. One of the horses, we had a leopard Appaloosa, and he was a stallion, and I was about the only one that could ride him. And my dad got on him, and Smokey reared up. My dad was a farm boy, and he grew up in the Sandhills in Nebraska, and was always around horses and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And usually a horse rears up and a horse comes down.
Right.
Yeah, this horse reared up and then fell over backwards.
Oh, what the heck?
On top of my dad.
Oh, my goodness.
with the horn of the saddle smashing him into the solar plexus.
Oh, my goodness.
And then when the horse got up, stepped on my dad's lower abdominal area and on his thigh.
Oh, man.
Turned out to be the thigh that he had the femur bone that he had the steel plate in from when he was about 14, and he thought what he was going to do was climb up there on the windmill, and he was going to hang on to it, and it would be pretty cool to go around in a circle. With that windmill, bring him around in a circle. Yeah, he got to the top of it, fell off of there, busted his femur. And,
Oh, my
yeah,
goodness.
so it had a big old plate in it. But so the horse steps on that, but, when the horn went into the solar plexus, and then the horse stood up and stepped on that lower abdominal area, it ruptured 4 discs in his lower spine. And it took everything for us kids to help get him into the car, and my mom to drive him to the emergency room. So they put him in the hospital, and of course, they told him that he was going to have spinal surgery, and that he would be down for 6 months. And my dad was like, "Are you kidding me? 6 months? I have 6 kids. There's no, I'm out of the game for 6 months. I mean, that's just not happening. It's just my mother had a great job with Union Pacific Railroad, but, my dad had a great job, and it was like, they needed 2 incomes. So, on about the 3rd day of laying in the hospital, a couple of my dad's buddies went up to the hospital, and they got on each side of him. Well, they got him in a wheelchair, got him out to the car, got on each side of him, and took him to a chiropractor. My dad was back to work the next week.
Wow.
And my father was a policeman. So he was back to work the next week.
Wow.
And that was a chiropractor. And we're talking like 66, 67,
Wow.
maybe. And he went to the chiropractor. No back surgery for him. And so I grew up with where, my father would always see a chiropractor. And, when it comes to bones, unless they're broken, if they're broken, yeah, you need the ER, and you need them set, and you need a cast. But when it comes to your bones and your spinal column and your neck, my advice, you see a chiropractor first. If the chiropractor can't take care of it, which I think there's very little that, a chiropractor can't take care of when it comes to bones, unless they're broken. And then you add the healing arts of, acupuncture to that, and it's absolutely amazing what it does by, opening those meridians, stimulating those meridians, and the healing that can take place. So, a really good chiropractor is absolutely, him or her, is worth their weight in platinum. They're beyond gold.
Wow.
Platinum.
Wow.
When you've got a good one. So if you're in the Denver area, you can't go wrong with Dr. Chuck Sanesteven. He's, what's so cool about him is he's so laid back, and he's really a dedicated healer. It's like, you're not leaving. He's not walking out of that room until he knows you feel better. Or everybody will wait. And you know what? And everybody, when they're laying there waiting for him, they're appreciating that the time that he's giving to the patient that he's in the room with, they're going to get that same type of consideration. And so, there's no worries with anybody there. You're there, you're in your spot, and sooner or later, you're going to get the treat. He's the one who's going to work on you. So, so as we go down each vertebrae, in between those vertebrae are the nerve endings, and those nerve endings go to organs and muscles, and okay, so your C1 vertebrae, that's your cervical. That's the first cervical vertebrae, and there's 7 cervical vertebrae. So your second cervical vertebrae, the area that the nerve supply flow takes care of is the eyes and the optic nerves, auditory nerves, your sinuses. Like sometimes you can just really have a really bad sinus and problem where you're having difficulty breathing and it's just not seeming to get better, but you can get your neck adjusted and then your sinuses are just pouring and draining and they open up. And that's because that was off a little bit. You know, those nerves were pinched. You needed to have that adjustment to free that up so that you got the good nerve supply flow going. Okay, so if you have a problem where, well, the other thing is the C2 vertebrae also takes care of the mastoid bones. It has a lot. It has everything to do with the tongue, which is the beginning part of the digestive tract, and the forehead. So if you're having sinus problems, chronic allergies, if you've fallen and your eyes are crossed, fall so hard, hit the back of your head where the optic nerves are at, you get your neck adjusted, and that'll straighten that out. It also helps with deafness, eye troubles, ear aches, fainting, certain causes of blindness. Can be just, if it's a sudden onset after you hit your head bad, that blindness, that immediate blindness, could be taken care of just by getting your neck adjusted. It's like when you got the old crashola over at the shop and stood up and hurt yourself bad, and it was like, I wanted you to go to a chiropractor.
Right.
Remember
right.
that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so but all the hardware in you, they're not going to adjust you when you got hardware in you, but at least that upper part of the back, they can. So your C3 vertebrae has to do with your cheekbones, your outer ear, all your face bones, your teeth, any type of numbness in the face, sometimes even eczema breakout that seems to be specific to the face, can have to do with if there's a problem with that C3 vertebrae. So, and you'll always find that when you go to the chiropractor, they don't just adjust one area. They work on the neck, and then they go all the way down the back, and then they adjust your hips. You make sure that when you straighten your legs out, that your heels are, even, that they're the same length. Because sometimes, you can lay somebody down on the table and straighten their legs out, and it's like, oh, geez, I've got about an inch difference here.
Wow.
Well, that's because your hips are out. You adjust the hips. And the legs are both the same length, the way that they should be. Okay, so if you've got a leg that's not hitting the ground the way it should, and you notice that it's a little off, or you're a little tilted.
And your name ain't Eileen.
I'm a little tilt. Go see a chiropractor. The 4C affects the nerve supply flow to the nose and the lips and the mouth and the eustachian tubes. Your eustachian tubes are what run from the inside of your ear down into the back of your throat. So if you've got like an ear infection, that infection can drain down that Eustacia tube into the back of the throat and then down the esophagus and out the digestive tract. Okay? That is your fourth cervical vertebrae. Hay fever, lots of heavy mucus, hearing loss are some of the effects of that C4 being out of whack. C5 affects your vocal cords and all of the glands in the neck and the pharynx. So if you feel like you're having some difficulty swallowing, and you're not moving that food back of the throat to swallow, and you feel that you have, it's hard to swallow, or it's like it feels like it's going to get stuck. You need your neck adjusted.
Very interesting.
You need your neck adjusted before you go to the doctor and have them put a scope down you and see what's going on. Go to the chiropractor. Hey, you'd be surprised how many times there's an easy fix.
Right.
And it's by freeing up that nerve supply flow. So, you can also, the C6 has to do with neck muscles and the shoulders and the tonsils. So, maybe a chronic sore throat. If you got ear problems, throat problems, or if your little ones have just gone through a bout with ear infections and tonsillitis, take them into the chiropractor. Have them, get them adjusted. Make sure that there's none of what they call a subluxation, that there's no pinching off of that nerve supply flow. You want to make sure that the spine is in good alignment and that all of that nervous system, the message from the spine to whatever organ or muscle or area of the body has the proper nerve pathway to send the message. And what will interfere with that is by it being pinched off.
Interesting.
Okay.
Interesting.
Your C7 is all the nerve supply flow to the thyroid gland. And it has to do with the shoulders and the elbows. So, the effect of that, if that's off, is, bursitis, arthritis, kind of feeling pain in the shoulder and the elbow, lots of colds, thyroid conditions you can't seem to get
Like
into
weight
balance.
or...
more of a hyper or
Because the
hypo.
thyroids are up here, right?
Your thyroid is here at the
Right.
base. It's at the base of your neck. It's at the base of your neck. And it looks like a butterfly. It's a gland on each side. So
Okay.
we've got two lobes to the thyroid. And then back behind the thyroid is the parathyroid. And the parathyroid is what regulates our calcium in the body.
So now, okay, my dad went and had his thyroid removed, if I'm not mistaken. And it just
No,
kind of
he's-
made me wonder, if he would have went and got his adjusted first,
Yeah.
Before he just went to the doctor.
Yeah.
Because knowing my dad, he did not go to the chiropractor first. He went
Yeah.
straight to the doctor first.
Right.
Because, it probably took his wife months and months and months just to even get him to go
Get him to go to the doctor.
To get it,
Yeah.
let alone a chiropractor. That's
Yeah, it's so sad that for so many years, the chiropractors were, there's more acceptance today for chiropractic, even than there is naturopathy, like with what I do. But chiropractors for years were really, medical doctors would go, oh, what a waste of time, oh, they're quacks, oh, blah, 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 blah. You know what? They can be primary physicians.
really.
Chiropractors, let me tell you something, they have as much schooling as a medical doctor.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
'Cause I was going to ask you how long they went to school
oh my
for.
gosh. Yes, they go to school as long as a medical doctor does. That's not 2 years and you're a chiropractor. They go through pre-med.
Okay.
Most certainly, yes, they do. Physiology, anatomy, pre-med, yes, they go through all of that. And then they go on and study the muscles and the bones and everything specifically for another 3 to 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Then you throw being an acupuncturist on top of that, you're talking another 3 years. Now, one thing that that my friend Dr. Santa Stephen, even though he even taught at the acupuncture college out here, he met an elderly Oriental doctor from China that moved to Boulder. And this was about, let's see here, I bet that was probably 18 years ago. And I'm telling you, every weekend for a couple of years, every weekend, he was unavailable. I mean, he worked during the week, and then on Saturday morning and Sunday morning, he was up, being taught by this elderly acupuncturist Chinese medicine doctor. And what was a little difficult at first was he had a little different way than how my friend had been taught, and how my friend in turn taught acupuncture. And I'll tell you what, you go to him, it's a shortcut. You are not going to be going, repeatedly, within 2-3 acupuncture treatments, he's got you lined out and corrected.
Wow. Very interesting.
So it's like he said, he learned so much that it was a mind blower what he learned from this little Oriental medicine doctor who was an acupuncturist from China.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's just really a cool guy. So, if you're in Denver, do yourself a favor. He's really a wonderful chiropractor. And then, so then you get into, after those first 7 top vertebrae, those cervical vertebrae, you get into 12 of the thoracic vertebrae. So this is moving down, as you can feel, the vertebrae in your neck, and then, coming down to the top of your back. So that goes into the thoracic area. And if you've got a T1 pinched off, well, you probably can't move your arm, or you've got a lot of pain in your arm. And it's like, wow, what happened? My arms felt fine when I went to sleep last night. Maybe I slept kind of wrong, and you're trying to stretch and stuff, and it's like, wow, man, the arm's really bothering me, or the elbow really hurts. Your hands, your wrists, maybe your fingers. It also affects the esophagus. So, maybe you're sitting there having breakfast going, wow, things feel like they're kind of getting stuck along the way coming down the esophagus. That all has to do with the nerve supply flow, the central nervous system, the nerve supply flow through that T1. So you can also get into problems that are, like a physical health reaction, where maybe you're going into asthma attacks, coughing, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, along with the pain in the lower arms and hands. That's your T1.
Wow. Your
T2 has to do with your heart and the valves and the coronary arteries. So, maybe you're dealing with a lot of chest pain. Maybe you're feeling like your heart's doing a little fluttering, like, hey, what's up with that? It's like my heart feels like it's kind of racing, and that to where it's doing something that it gets your attention.
Right, when you know you haven't done anything for it to start doing that.
Exactly. And the first thing to do is get your upper back adjusted. Make sure that you rule that out, that maybe you had some friends come over and you guys decided to go play basketball, or you're out there in the front yard and you're throwing the football around, smashing and crashing into each other. Or a day at the park and you're grabbing up the little ones and you're lifting them and hoisting them, and just kind of nothing like some really great weather to screw yourself up,
Right,
go outside and
right.
take advantage of it, and then the next day it's like, ah, geez, I hurt bad. Good time to go to the chiropractor. Make sure that you just didn't kind of tweak something the wrong way. Okay,
Right.
So the nervous system, as you go completely through the spinal column, every single nerve that comes from the spinal column, it comes down from the brain, the nerve bundle, it comes down from the brain, it runs along the spinal column. Then those nerve endings, they go out, and during prenatal life, when we're developing, and you look at the anatomy of that development in the stages, you can see where, you've kind of got the tadpole stage. I always say where you look like the little tadpole.
Right.
Okay, that's the brain and the spinal column. And then pretty soon, after all of that networking of these nerve endings take place down the spine, you notice there's those little buds along the spine. Right along the spine, you see these little buds. Well, those buds are the thyroid, the pharynx, the tongue, the tonsils, the heart, the lungs, the bronchioles, the spleen, the liver, the pancreas, the stomach, the large intestine, small intestine, ileocecal valves, here's the limbs, there's the arms, there's the legs, there's the hips, and as you look through, the anatomy of the development through those gestation periods, you can see how we go from the little tadpole to little buds, that those little buds all blossom and develop into organs and glands. And they're specifically fed from the nerve supply flow from the spinal column.
Wow.
Okay.
See, I didn't realize. So tadpole, that's just the brain and the spinal column,
that's what I joke and call it, because if you
okay.
if you look at because if you look at it early,
that's what they.
okay. So if you stop and think about, you're a dad, and doctors used to always send the women home with the little books, that had each stage of development, and so you've got, I joke and call them a tadpole because, you got your little egg here, kind of, and then coming off of that, is like a little tail.
Okay.
Well, this is the brain, this is the spinal column, and actually, the eyes take whole prenatal life in order to completely, totally develop.
Wow.
They are probably the most complex organ that we have, is our eyes.
So they start in the very beginning of the...
beginning, you can see where the eyes are at.
Wow.
And it takes so long for the eyes to develop. And they're one of the things that are first things there. They're in the inner eardrum.
Wow.
They're the two earliest, and they take the longest to develop.
Wow.
So, so that's why...
I mean, that's so amazing. It really is. It's amazing.
It's incredible. It really is. It is amazing. And that's why, being in natural healing, it's always great when a young woman or a young couple, calls me or comes to me and says, we really want to have a baby. But before we have a baby, we want to make sure that maybe we want to do some cleanses, and we want to make sure that our system is clean and that, we're built up, and that I have enough nutrients and storage, because I want a baby that's healthy.
Uh-huh.
And, no smoking, no drinking, because sometimes, a lot of times, there's far too many pregnancies where, you're out partying with your friends, you're doing some drinking, and, things you probably shouldn't be doing, and then, oh, geez, wow, I just found out I'm pregnant. When you usually find out you're pregnant, you're 6 or 8 weeks. So, the problem there is, during the most crucial time, you had things that were coming, exposure to your body that hopefully, the baby was okay. But sometimes they're not, by the time you find out that you're pregnant. And then, there's, DNA things that happen and environmental things that happen that no matter what good things, wonderful things that you do, and the planning and being aware and astute as to what you need to be doing, that, changes the whole complexion of it. So, we do have, now we have so many things that affect the central nervous system. We have so many problems with the central nervous system. And, you look at the air. You look at the air, you look at the water. Those are, the air is one common denominator that we all share.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's so many metric tons of toxins in the air that when you breathe those in, they do have an effect on the central nervous system. When you're talking aluminum and mercury and cadmium and fluoride, these are all central nervous system toxins. Just like the polio vaccine. In 1970, they stopped putting in the polio vaccine RV40. Well, RV40, every single tumor, brain tumor, any tumor that grows along the nerve pathway that is part of the nervous system, attached and growing around a nerve bundle or the nervous system, when that is biopsied, the DNA of every single one of those tumors that have to do with an attachment in the brain or along the central nervous system, the DNA of that has RV40.
Wow.
And that was in the polio vaccine. And so that stopped in 1970. So you stop and think about the children that had that in 1970 that have become parents. So that DNA has been passed on to your child.
Wonderful.
And since they were exposed to that through the genetic programming in the DNA, they will expose their children to it.
Oh.
It takes 3 to 4 generations to eradicate something like that out of the DNA.
Wow.
So we're still looking at, 1975 was 45 years ago.
Right.
So we're looking at least another 45 to 60 years.
Right. I was going to say my kids' grandkids.
That's right. Your children's grandchild. It will be at that point that RV40
Wow.
is out of their genetic coding. So, what do we have that I say is epidemic? Look at all of look at all the brain cancer with children. Look at all the brain tumors.
Right.
And it can be a primary. Brain tumor in a child can be a primary. Sometimes in adults I've read where they say it's a secondary, but I've had people come to me over the years that had like glioblastomas and things like that brain tumors that they hadn't found cancer anywhere else, but I think that is profound, that in the sectioning and the testing of these tumors when they are removed, the DNA within that tumor comes from the polio vaccine.
Wow.
The RV40.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
I mean, that's all I can say, really. I mean, wow.
Wow.
I mean.
It was removed in 1970 from all vaccines. But, hey, we're
So,
still
and-
not
and-
done with the side effect of that.
Right. So now I've heard. Okay, so when did we eradicate polio supposedly from the United States?
Well, they still had polio in the 50s. My first husband was given the polio vaccine when he was 2. And he was walking and everything at that point. And then he quit walking. He was in a wheelchair until he was 7.
Wow. Because of the polio
But
vaccine?
that was right after the polio vaccine. Yeah, he
Oh, my
took the polio
goodness.
vaccine, and he was crippled and in a wheelchair until he was 7. I have a really, really good friend in Ohio that after she did the polio vaccine, same thing happened with her. It was within a couple of weeks, she was not able to walk. She was in a wheelchair quite a while. And, through physical therapy and everything, she was able to walk again. But one thing is in about 1980, 1982, when she got into herbs, she had an area always from the time that she was little after that bout with polio, where she had an area of her shoulder blade to, from that upper part of the spine to the shoulder blade, where it was numb, where you could, poke her, pinch her, hit her with a straight pin. She couldn't feel anything there. Within 5 months on an herb program, she got that sensation back. And for the last 33, 34 years, she's able to completely feel that shoulder blade, that scapula.
Wow.
There's no numbness there
I
anymore.
have a question for you, and I hope I wasn't I thought I was paying attention. Okay, but you said that she was in a wheelchair from 2 to 7, right? Or, I mean,
my first husband was from age 2 to 7.
Okay,
And I think my friend, she was in a wheelchair for almost 10 years.
So now, but you said...
After the polio vaccine.
After the polio vaccine. Now, that was... But then you said that they had a bout with polio, but didn't they have a bout with the polio vaccine and not the actual polio? I mean, was it...
Their polio came from the live vaccine.
From the actual vaccine
and actually,
itself, so it wasn't something that they had gotten...
Swimming somewhere or anything, contracting it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure.
Right. No, they got theirs through the vaccination. And, Dr. Salk, I remember reading an article 30 years ago where Dr. Salk regretted coming up with that vaccine. He said that if he would have known that bovine cows, that's bovine, had a natural immunity to polio. And I came across this information in digging for research because in the mid and later 80s, I had a chewable colostrum product. And there was not a lot of knowledge out there about taking a colostrum supplement. But at that point in time, I was too early on the scene with a colostrum product. Because in the 80s, we're talking about the only people who were interested in herbs and, eating naturally and healthy. They were always picked on. They were always picked on. Those health freaks. Well, I'll tell you what. The health freaks aren't the ones laying around in the hospital bed waiting on a diagnosis. Sorry, that's the truth. They're not. And so they tended to be people who were pretty anti-bovine, anything from the cow, anti-cow. So, they weren't really interested in a colostrum product, especially when they found out it came from a cow. But, the people that did use it, it was amazing. And what it did with your T cell count and the lymphocyte count and got you back on your feet really quick. Well, you can go in and find colostrum products. And I've had a lot of them tested, and a lot of them I wouldn't feed my family. I've randomly pulled them off of shelves and sent them in to be, tested. And, so some of them, they're too much heat in the process damages the T1 and T2 that trigger, mixed with the saliva, trigger the thymus gland, whatever you're been exposed to make an antibody for it. And a lot of that process takes place in that lower part of the small intestine called the Peyer's patch. And that's where the immune system is at, and it all has to do with little lymphocytes and little lymph nodes. And so we'll go more into that when I do the immune system. But so one thing that I came across was some writings where Dr. Salk, the person he used to test his vaccine out was his teenage son and some of his buddies.
Oh, shit.
And two of them ended up in a wheelchair. Dr. Salk's son's friends. And in the interview that I was reading, he had said if he would have known that bovine naturally had an immunity to polio, he'd had everybody eating colostrum.
Wow.
To prevent polio. So it was a regret of his. And that was mid-'80s when I came across that interview and that information. So, yeah. But, go ahead.
Because they're still actively giving the polio vaccine today, right?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look, because I don't vaccinate. My children weren't vaccinated.
I'm almost positive now that, if you want your children in public schools, they got to go through this vaccine, and I think one of them is polio, if I'm not mistaken. Polio 1 and 2, if there's
it's a dead virus, but you know what? But the thing is it doesn't matter if it's alive or dead. It's still debris. It's still a toxic debris that the immune system doesn't need to deal with. And that's where, like, when you get a shot, you bypass those areas of the body where normally your exposure takes place, which is breathing it in. having it pass through your tonsils. Your tonsils are your first line of defense for the immune system.
Okay, I have heard
Your
that.
tonsils. You need your tonsils.
Which I don't have mine, so
Do you have your appendix?
yes, I do.
A lot of times people who have had their tonsils removed end up with their appendix.
Well, I
Removed.
really wasn't supposed to have had them removed. It so happened I had an abscess that was forming on my jugular vein right underneath my tonsils, and it gave me lockjaw and oh yeah, it was horrible. They had to drill a hole through my teeth and puree everything so I could drink. It was horrible. So they had to remove my tonsils to get to the abscess, and it was not a fun procedure.
Whoa. Whoa. So I'm going to work my, excuse me, my way down the spine here. My granddaughter just got over double pneumonia. And, boy, I'll tell you, it's been a rough couple weeks.
Wow.
A little bit of that cough, but things are moving. Thank goodness. Anyway, so the T3 has to do with lungs, bronchial tubes. The pleura is the sac that the lungs sit in. They're attached to the rib cage. So if you get pleurisy, it hurts. It hurts so bad with pleurisy, the inflammation, because, as you oxygenate and you breathe in and those lungs expand and they push up next to that pleura, it's like, whoa, wow, does that hurt? Bronchitis, pleurisy, pneumonia. Your T4 has to do with the gallbladder and common bile duct. Your T5 is nerve supply messages to the liver and the solar plexus. And it has a lot to do with the bloodstream. So liver conditions, fevers, low blood pressure, anemia, poor circulation can be that T5. T6 is the stomach. So it's not uncommon that if you got a lot of stomach problems and stuff, you can, get your back adjusted. And if that T6 is out and that's put back into place, your stomach ache goes away. T7 affects the pancreas and the duodenum. A duodenum is, the very beginning part of the small intestine. T8 affects the nerve supply flow to the spleen. T9 affects the nerve supply flow to the adrenal glands. And T10, nerve supply flow to the kidneys. T11, the kidneys and the ureter. T12 affects the small intestines, and it can interfere with lymphatic circulation. And that lymphatic circulation, that Peyer's patch, is groups of lymph nodes, and that's your immune system. Then you get into your lumbar area. Your L1, that's the large intestine. And if you've got a problem in that L1, it can cause a problem of constipation. It can cause a problem of colitis, chronic loose stools, ruptures, hernias. That's that L1. L2 has to do with your appendix and the abdominal area and the upper legs. So if you have a lot of cramping, or varicose veins, sudden onset of noticing that you're getting a lot of swelling with your veins and the varicose veins, that can have a lot to do with maybe the L2 being out. L3 has to do with your reproductive organs, the uterus, bladder, the knees. L4, prostate gland, muscles of the lower back, the sciatic nerve. L5 has to do with your lower legs and the ankles and feet. The sacrum has to do with your hips and the bones. And then the very tiny little tail there at the bottom of the spinal column has to do with the rectum area. So if you've got problems there, you can end up with a lot of, it's very painful to sit.
So when I crushed those discs in there and those vertebrae, I really messed up a lot of systems.
You did.
You know,
Yes, you did.
that's why I was chuckling because I was like, kind of like going, damn, man. I mean, it made me realize, like, wow, I really did some damage. No wonder I had to go on all these pills when they had replaced my...
Yeah.
Well, because I had 2 surgeries in 2 days, where the first day they went and they put the rods and the plates, screws in, and then the very next morning they turned me over, they opened me up in the beginning, in the front, and they moved all the insides, removed everything, put it in, and then I had to go back for another surgery the next day to remove the rods and the screws that were holding the rods.
Yeah.
Which, then by that time I was 1.5 inches taller than what I was.
Uh-huh.
And I felt the difference right away.
Heck of a way to grow an inch or 2, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. So, this central nervous system, the brain, the spinal column, the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, to realize that we've got 10 billion nerve cells. Surrounding the brain is all the spinal fluid that cushions the brain between the skull. And, when you get things like encephalitis and meningitis, that's that's infection in that spinal fluid. Hydrocephalia. That's too much spinal fluid being produced and creates pressure on the brain. And when that develops real young with infants, the skull gets bigger with the hydrocephalia. When I was a child, you could tell when kids had hydrocephalia because their skull was really big. Then what they were able to do is to put a shunt in where it took that excess spinal fluid, ran that down along the neck, and ended up getting that down into the abdominal cavity, where that excess of fluid would spill into the abdominal cavity and be absorbed through lymph nodes and tissue.
Wow.
There. And so their skull grew normally. So unlike, almost 60 years ago, you could always tell someone who had hydrocephalia. In the last probably 45 years with the shunting, it's not something that's real noticeable. Okay, because of that shunting. So the spinal fluid, what it does is it cushions the brain between the skull. It's also constantly supplied with oxygen-rich blood from the heart to keep all of these little fragile cells alive. And this is why, with an adult, you have 3 minutes to resuscitate somebody. An adult. You have 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes because that direct blood supply flow from the heart to the brain to keep that spinal fluid loaded with oxygen-rich blood. If that is cut off, 3 minutes, that's where you get into brain damage.
Yes.
Now, you can have up to 20 to 30 minutes to resuscitate an infant. I was shocked at that when a doctor told me that 40 years ago. Yeah, 20 to 30 minutes. Because they don't use as much oxygen.
Yeah, I do know this firsthand.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm,
Yeah.
because you're,
Once
you
the
know,
heart stops, this pathway is what causes brain death.
wow, yeah.
Okay? So the brain handles absolutely everything. The organs, muscles, emotions, thoughts, reasoning, knowledge, memories, creativity. The brainstem controls the breathing and the heartbeat and other autonomic processes that are independent of the conscious brain functions. So, the medulla area of the brain, this is what incites that first breath that we take, when we're born. It has to do with the medulla area, and that is part of the autonomic nervous system. That's the automatic. That's the innate. That's the part of the nervous system that's just, it's going on, it's doing what it needs to do in spite of whatever consciously you're aware of something else, like you've got the autonomic nervous system that's firing the heart and keeping us breathing and all of that, while you got your conscious brain where, well, I'm going to walk over there and turn on the TV because it's about time for football, or I want to watch something, or, grabbing your hat and your coat and picking up your keys and, going out and starting your car. That autonomic nervous system is constantly, that's a nervous system that's constantly going separate from your conscious brain, okay?
It just kind of, while you were explaining that,
and you don't see all the Italian motions going on.
Right?
You don't see, like, drawing things visually on the wall here.
Right?
Okay.
That's why I can't wait to start recording these shows. But what
Phil, draw you a picture.
what you reminded me of is, like the automatic, which is like you're sitting there, it's always on, and suddenly what the hell was that? It was like a spasm or something like a.
Okay. A startle.
Or well,
yeah.
I not a startle. I because I'll be sitting there and suddenly, I'll just have a body spasm for some oddball reason unknown. It'll just, it's like, what the hell? It felt like an electrical shock went through me.
Oh yeah.
It
could be some of the hardware that you have in you. The nerve supply, throughout all of that as well. But,
so that'd be something different than what you were just talking about.
Well,
okay, I was mistaken.
And they found, too, that there was a double-blind study done with folic acid. And people that were given, actually it was folic acid and it was niacin. Folic acid and niacin. And those that were given the folic acid and niacin, as opposed to the group study that were given of placebo, they waited 30 minutes and then, did things that startled people. Those that had been given the folic acid and the niacin didn't really startle. The ones who had the placebo, who were more than likely low in folic acid, which is a B vitamin, and niacin is in the B family. So B complex. So if you're low in B complex, which is water soluble, you can have a higher startle reflex. See what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
If you're lower in B complex, and and you stop and think about, no matter how much I tell you in all the shows, that wheat and corn, wheat and corn, wheat and corn, wheat and corn. It's GMO. It's genetically modified. It's stripped of all of its nutrients. Brown rice, white rice. White rice is stripped of its nutrients, just like the wheat. This GMO is stripped of its outer coating. That's where the B complex is at. Okay, so it's stripped. Then what they do is they turn around and they fortify it. They enrich it they strip it out during the process, and then they add back in a synthetic source into the food, and they call it enriched. Unfortunately, don't think that your cellular system, all those little cells communicating with each other, don't think that when this person over here eats the brown rice that naturally has occurring the B complex, the cell goes, yeah, we got some nutrition from this. Yeah, we can feed the nerves. We get some bioavailable B complex. But then you get the one over here eating the enriched white bread that has the synthetic, no energy field, chemical made vitamins, and think that those cells go, what am I supposed to do with this? What is this? How am I going to use this? Oh God, you keep giving me more and more and more of this. What am I going to do with this? Well, I guess I'll store it off over here because I don't know what to do with it. But you're still deficient. So pretty soon, the body is giving up as much as it can out of storage. When you're under a lot of stress, your body is not only using up the B complex that you're getting from your diet, it is huge amounts of pulling out of the central nervous system calcium and magnesium. Calcium's the knitter. That's what knits and strengthens and builds and heals everything. Nothing heals without calcium present. And then magnesium. We talked about it before. It's the relaxant mineral. And so if you're under a lot of stress, your body is using up vast amounts of calcium. And where do you think it's going to pull that calcium from? Your bones.
Right.
It's going to pull it from your bones. And then what ends up happening is, you're breaking things. Things are busting. And you want to chalk it up to, well, I'm older. Well, no. It's not because you're older. It is not because you're older. It is because your diet is not rich enough in calcium, magnesium, B complex, and you don't have a good reservoir because you've been neglecting. Supplements. Supplements are needed. We need supplements, and we need good quality supplements. There's a lot of stuff out there on the shelf that, hey, I really wouldn't give my animals. I really wouldn't,
right.
And I don't. If it's like recently, one of our dogs just had 3 puppies, and hey, I didn't go buy her some inexpensive bone meal or something to mix in with her food. No, she got the really good stuff right off the shelf that we take. Not some cheapo stuff. And and a lot of food that I did, made with organic chicken and grass-fed beef soup bones, and made her a lot of the food while she was pregnant. And a lot of times, this is making it feed it true because she's so picky. She's so picky, but she loves, carrots and chicken, and she loves balsamati rice.
That's good.
So, a lot of these things, when you boil up the chicken on a low boil, or you're boiling up soup bones, keep adding to that marrow inside of those bones. It's just loaded with nutrition and good blood building factors and stuff there. And you just add some more water to it and put your chopped up veggies in there and the balsamati rice. Put a lid over it, bring it to a boil, put a lid on it, turn it down, let it simmer, and you have dog food. Actually, it's like, I think I said something in another show where I had, made a big batch of that up, and my oldest grandson was there, and I come into the kitchen, and he's sitting at the kitchen table, and he's got this big plate of it, and it's like, he calls me Gima, and he goes, Gima, this is delicious. This is so good. And I looked over at him and I said, oh yeah, well, you're eating the dog food. Dropped his fork, and it was like, what is this? And I just started laughing. I said, it's okay. It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff. It's just that Grandpa's not going to eat it, So it is something that, it's for the dog. It's just, for the dogs. But, it's just good, healthy food. So that's okay. If you like it, go ahead.
Have fun.
Big old pan up there. You can have some more. But when you're done, I'm going to portion it out and freeze it. Let it cool down. And freeze it. And, I'll warm it up in, some boiling water and the bag, and give it to the dog. So it's like, okay, all right.
Well, they ate good then, huh?
Well, it was. It was good. It was all good stuff. It was organic carrots and, green peppers and red peppers and, so onion greens and the tops and celery and, and Vagisil. I love Gaylord Housen's Vagisil, and had the pink Himalayan salt that has 85 minerals and trace minerals in it, and it was all good stuff, but it was homemade dog food, so I mean, and that's that's what we want to feed our animals. We don't want to feed our. Remember years ago, probably 35 years ago, I watched some video on making dog food. And I couldn't believe the stuff that was being thrown into this vat.
I bet.
It's like, are you kidding me? There was like chunks of cowhide.
Yeah.
It's like, that's garbage. You throw that out. That goes into dog food.
Right.
Not
Yuck.
my dogs.
No.
Not giving that to my dogs. Okay, so back to the autonomic processes. The autonomic, that's that breathing, heartbeat, everything that, subconsciously, happens, that the conscious, it's independent of the conscious brain. And then the frontal lobes that are under the forehead, that's your self-control. That's your planning, your reasoning. The back of the brain is where the occipital lobe is at. That controls all your vision. The hypothalamus. I talked about the thalamus in the beginning one with the digestion. That's the brain switchboard.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so there's sensory, smelling, all of that. That's in the brain. That's in the thalamus. Then there's the hypothalamus. It sits right below the thalamus gland. And its most important function is to link the nervous system to the glandular system. And the glandular system, that's your endocrine system. So the hypothalamus links that, the central nervous system of the brain, to the messaging to the glandular system. The thalamus and the hypothalamus is also where toxins that you take in and breathe in, they can pass through that area. They can pass that brain barrier and make their way, those toxins make their way into the brain. So, I'm sorry, a lot of this stuff that is being spewed into our atmosphere that we're breathing in, it is having a toxic effect of passing through that switchboard area, that thalamus area of the brain, and making its way into the brain tissue and causing problems. So your food colorings and things like these artificial sweeteners, they pass through that and affect directly the brain tissue. Okay, so that's why, hey, I'm sorry, it's like, I've said this before,
So would you
You
take
can go
something
to
like
the-
a Enviro Detox to
Well,
kind
I'm going to
of...
get into that. Well, go
I'm
to
sorry, I
Cola-
didn't mean to
go,
jump.
Yeah, go to Cola and ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba is a great detoxifier for the brain tissue. It absorbs a lot of toxins, and throughout China, throughout Asia, ginkgo biloba trees, they grow everywhere. Look how dirty their air is over there. It's awful. But these ginkgo trees grow everywhere, and they clean the air. They help to, absorb
Wow.
a lot.
If that's helping clean the air, oh my goodness, I'd
Yeah.
hate to see what the air looks like without them there.
Without them. Yeah.
Oh
That's
my
why they all run
goodness.
around with masks.
Wow.
Still, but ginkgo, just like our trees, our trees put off ozone and that purifies and cleans things. So it's really good to live where you have lots and
That's
lots of
amazing
trees.
that you say that, and it cleans the air, and then it's so good for your memory and your brain and your mental alertness.
Yeah,
I
ginkgo.
mean,
Mhm.
wow, that's mind blowing within
Ginkgo's
itself,
amazing.
man. I mean,
ginkgo is wonderful stuff, and I'll get into more of what ginkgo does. Ginkgo and go to cola. So the hypothalamus, again, that helps to connect the nervous system to the glandular system, and through the pituitary gland, and the hypothalamus sits below the thalamus gland, which is the brain switchboard. It's extremely sensitive to poisons, neurotoxins, mercury, aluminum, fake sugar. The hypothalamus gland is responsible for controlling the body temperature, your hunger, thirst, fatigue, the sleep cycle. Best thing you can do for your sleep cycle is tyrosine and melatonin will help to regulate that sleep cycle pattern. Bee pollen is an excellent food for the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland, one of the foods that is excellent for the pituitary gland, and that's our master gland. It controls all of the glands in the body, the thyroid and adrenals, and ovaries or testes. For the pituitary gland is alfalfa sprouts.
very interesting,
Alfalfa sprouts, wonderful food, loaded.
right? I love it in salads, so I mean,
loaded with nutrients, and and it's really easy to sprout, alfalfa sprouts at home, so that you have them readily available right there, so that when you pull those out and put them on your salads or into other foods and stuff, that I like them wrapped up with bok choy and watercress.
Oh,
and
yeah, that
stuff, and
sounds
you
good.
do the thin sliced carrots and celery and radishes, and then wrap those in the rice wraps. Yeah, this is really good.
Sounds good.
The sympathetic nervous system assists in the control over most of the body's internal organs. It also gets the body mobilized under stress. So The sympathetic nervous system is real responsible for, it's the sympathetic nervous system that kicks in those adrenal glands. So if you're like confronted in a situation, a fight or flight mechanism, that's the adrenal glands that respond to that. You know, like you hear about something happening, and one person lifts a car up off somebody.
Right.
That's that fight or flight that kicks in and takes place. That comes from the sympathetic nervous system, and that's the adrenal glands that pump out all that adrenaline to have that super strength that you have in that moment that you absolutely do something that is absolutely incredible from a strength standpoint.
Right.
It's adrenaline. Okay. The parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for regulating everything unconsciously. Okay. Our neurotransmitters and receptors, the GABA, GABA is what feeds these neurotransmitters and the receptors. Neurotransmitters, send the messages to other areas of the brain. So, like, if you want to, pick up this chlorophyll alkaline water, that goes not only, it's the frontal lobes wanting you to do that, but that message has to also go to a few other areas of the brain in order for you to extend out, lift it up, bring it up to your mouth. So it's not just one part of the brain that pulls off what you're able to do. And it's those neurotransmitters that send those messages to where they need to go.
So something that seems so
easy,
simple and easy is actually quite complex.
Very complex.
Wow.
Because, for instance, the things with seizures is you may want to pick this up, but instead of those neurotransmitters sending it to all of the areas that you need to pick this up, it may waylay and short circuit and go to a completely different area of the brain that can trigger a seizure.
Kind of like there was this news reporter lady giving a news report, and she kind of had a stroke on TV, right? But my point is, after it was all said and done, she was talking about having the stroke on live TV, right? And you can tell that she was like, my brain knew what I wanted to say,
But she was fighting with
but anything that would come out my mouth was nothing what my brain was
saying. Well, yeah, she couldn't intelligently get it from the brain across the mouth because of the stroke, whatever area of the brain was stroked.
Man, that's just because it just makes me think of like a computer board.
Right. Well, that's what it is.
You get one circuit out and
That's
it kind
right.
of messes
Short.
that whole.
Absolutely. So, the thing is that those neurotransmitters are what calm, an excessive GABA, GABA supplements, feeds the neurotransmitters that calm the excessive nervous firing of the brain. GABA is deficient when there's, situations of mental illness and seizures, bipolar, schizophrenia, ADD, ADHD. 2 handfuls of raw cashews are as powerful as an antidepressant. There's plenty of research out there now that it says that a couple handfuls of raw, your seeds and nuts need to be raw.
Right.
Not roasted, toasted, whatever. You destroy the enzymes, you destroy the properties in the food. And there is research that compared with serotonin medications the Prozac and Paxil and Wellbutrin and other. There's so many of them out there now.
Right.
That they did a study with them and found that the raw cashews, 2 handfuls a day, were as effective as the antidepressant medications were.
Wow.
So, and if you've got really good insurance and you don't have to pay anything for your antidepressants, then I guess that's pretty inexpensive for you because raw cashews are not cheap.
Right. But
You can get them, get them on sale and they'll freeze well. Just buy up plenty of them when they're on sale. I always keep on hand raw cashews.
I love cashews.
Love them. And they're good fat. They're a lot of times people say, oh, you don't want those, they're just so full of fat. Well, they're good fat. It's medium chain essential fatty acids like coconut oil. Coconut oil is excellent for the central nervous system and for the brain. And look at all the research now with coconut oil and curcumin from the active property from turmeric.
Right.
Look at all of the research with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. They're saying now there was some research that in taking a history of all of these different, like, over-the-counter medications, if you're into NyQuil and taking these cold products and cold and flu products over-the-counter, I don't take them. I don't buy them. They don't get my money. You just look at the back and, my brain just can't go there. Why do you have to have such a list of stuff that, why is it even in there? Who cares if it's blue? Blue is, I don't know, you think that's a nighty-night color? So it's like the medicine blue? I don't know. You can keep your Blue Lake 40. I'm not interested in it, but, I'm always going to go through something with, just doing what, homeopathics, doing your herbs, lots of juicing, lots of fluids, push everything, you can naturally. And, and I did that with my granddaughter, and unfortunately, she had an appointment with someone, and there was a lot of coughing and sneezing, and in the next 12 hours, she was running a fever and had a little cough. And, so she's in the tub, some ginger bath, some baking soda, rubbing her down with olive oil and frankincense and a product called On Guard. And, so for over the next couple of days, Tuesday she was pretty good. Sent her to school. When I picked her up from school, she had 102.5 fever.
Oh, man.
So I get her back home, I throw some stuff in the blender, make her a smoothie, dump a bunch of stuff in the smoothie.
Right,
that,
right.
She's not going to want to take, herbally. And so fix her a bath, the whole thing again, rubbing her down with essential oils and, just on it. Fluids. I didn't get a whole lot of sleep. I'm up, getting her sitting up, getting her, a couple of mouthfuls of, drink something. Vaporizer going, essential oils in the vaporizer. Finally, this fever was just being pretty stubborn. And so I took her to the ER. And sure enough, she had double pneumonia.
Wow.
And one thing the ER doctor said is, we have an awful lot of this. We have been inundated at the emergency room. All these little kids have got pneumonia.
Wow.
And walking pneumonia and gone into pneumonia and wow. And I said, chemtrails. And he said, what? And I said, chemtrails. He said, spell that. I said, CHEMTRAILS, chemtrails. He says, what are those? I says, you don't know what chemtrails are? He says, go home and research it, okay? You know what all those cross patterns are in the sky? So you wonder why some jets go by and they don't leave anything behind, but it's all this other stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's the cadmium, the aluminum, lots of extra fluoride, I guess, Wonder what they're going to do, since now a lot of municipal water systems don't want fluoride in it anymore. Whoa! They'll be, spewing it out in the atmosphere.
Right.
That's what'll end up happening with that one. But, yeah, so, why is everybody sick with the same thing? Well, what all are we all breathing? And then finally after, me constantly being around that, then, I got the, cough and burned a little bit of a fever, but I certainly fared, better than her. I mean, I didn't have to do, any medications. And, as sick as she was, hey, yeah, you know what? Grandma did have a prescription. I did. My little
You're a good
sweetie
grandma.
feeling good, but it still didn't stop, the homeopathics and the paying attention to the fluids and the quality of everything that I was giving her.
Right, right. Well,
And now she has absolutely no cough at all. And they were pretty happy to see her back at school. I mean, she missed a week of school, so. But, yeah, so there's a lot of bad stuff out there that we're breathing.
Right.
And people are getting sick. And the thing is that, it could have been a whole lot worse. She wasn't hospitalized.
True. That's true.
It was like the doctor went, wow, she is hydrated. And, but we just need, and even with the vaporizer going, trying to get that stuff hydrated in her lungs and loose to get moving was, it was quite the chore.
Oh, I bet.
It was quite the chore. But, okay, so back to, the essential fatty acids. Remember I've told you before that, we get this free radical damage to our cells because, these free radicals create in our cells is due to those oils getting rancid. You got to remember that every cell in the body its outer coating is bathed in an essential fatty acid. So if you're not getting good fats in your diet, like cashews, avocados, butter, olive oil, the sesame oil, coconut oil, fish oils, flaxseed oil. These are all really, really good oils that keep every cell covered in healthy essential fatty acids. So if your diet is full of Crisco and margarine and deep fried and GMO corn oil, just everybody knows what rancid oil smells like.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. What happens with oxidation of your cell? That's rancid oil on your cells. That's why it's so important that you have good quality fats. And look at all the problems that people got into health-wise when we went a 20-year period of time of low-fat, fake-fat diets.
Right.
It went the complete opposite way. Your body does better with good fats. So, lecithin. Our brain is made up. in the majority, it's made up of lecithin, good fat, DHA. We need good fat for the nerve endings and the whole nervous system and for the brain to function. It used to be said years ago, it's like, you'll kill brain tissue and you cannot regenerate brain tissue. You know what? Yes, you can. Now they're just now starting to say that, hey, you can regenerate brain tissue. You know what? In about 1982, my handicapped son was at Children's Hospital, and the doctor, the neurologist came in. And I was standing there with my mom, and the neurologist comes in, and he's got one of these little spiral notebooks in his shirt pocket, real small one, and a couple of pins in his pocket. And in with him comes 7 interns, and we're at Children's Hospital in Denver. And he said, is Todd's mom here? And I stepped forward. And he turned around to those interns. And he says, Mom here is an herbalist, and she's studying to be a naturopath. Well, this obviously was what the pediatrician had told him, because this was the first time I met the doctor. I didn't know who he was. And he said, I need to tell you, if my advice is, if she has anything to say, I expect you to listen up.
Wow.
He pulls this little spiral notebook out and he flips it open and he says, young lady, what do you give your son herbally? And he turns to these interns and he said, and he's pointing at me and he says, I've just come from looking over his CT scans of his brain. Mom here has stopped brain deterioration. And he looked at me and he turned around to me and my mom and he said, we have absolutely nothing in the medical field to stop brain deterioration. What kind of herbs do you give him? Do you know out of those 7 doctors, one of them was a lady resident. And she's the only one that came back into the room. And for the next 3 days that I was there, when she would come in that room and we would talk for hours. She picked my brain of everything from a pediatric standpoint that I knew as to not to feed a baby cereal because it can't digest it. All it's going to do is create a mucus condition, and then you have ear infections and bronchitis. I was absolutely against vaccines, but you know what? So was she.
Wow.
So was she.
Okay.
And we talked about foods to get them started with. We talked about breastfeeding. We talked about herbs. We talked about cold sheet treatments, what to do in severe fevers, and wrapping them up in cold sheets and rubbing their feet down with garlic and olive oil. And she told me, she says, you know what? She says, I want to be the best pediatrician that I could possibly be. And she said, is there any books? What kind of books should I read? Can you recommend some books? And I said, you know what? It's like I tell everybody. If you want a good foundation, your foundation starts with Dr. Bernard Jensen. Once you understand all of his teachings and you're strong in that foundation, you can venture off and read some of this other stuff because you're going to be able to pick out what's baloney and what isn't.
Okay.
Dr. Bernard Jensen. That's who you want. And so she said, well, I'm going on vacation and I'm going to meet my fiance in California. And I said, really? I said, Dr. Jensen lives in California. And I said, where are you going in California? And she said, I'm going to Escondido. And it was like, you have got to be kidding me. Dr. Jensen lives in Escondido, California, up in the mountains. He's got a big healing center there. He's got goats and organic trees and vegetable gardens and everything. I gave her that information, and then what I did was I got a hold of Dr. Jensen, asked if it was okay to give his telephone number, and he said it was fine. He'd love to have her come up to the ranch, spend the afternoon with him. He'd love to speak to her. I gave her his telephone number. I never crossed paths with her again, but you know what? Wow. What a blessing, I'm sure in the future it was for whoever ended up with having her as a pediatrician. But, the thing that this neurologist had to say, about the brain deterioration. Gotu kola was one of the herbs that that my son Todd got all the time. It was gotu kola. And gotu kola, you hear about a memory like an elephant?
Uh-huh.
Well, elephants make a journey up to in the mountains going after gotu kola herb. And they actually do a lot of the thinning out by consuming the herb and the roots.
Uh-huh.
And what that does is it thins them out and it makes it prolific to continue to be very prolific and grow. And an elephant, when they're going after the gotu kola, it's spelled Gotu Kola. It is not related to at all the kola nut, which is loaded with caffeine. I'm sure you've probably heard of kola nut. Sometimes it's in some of these products for, where you're wanting a lot of energy. No, kola nuts are high natural occurring caffeine, and that's very separate. It's different. It's a different plant. And so the elephants, they walk up the mountain, but when they're coming down the mountain, elephants sit down and they turn around and they scoot down.
Backwards,
They backwards, yes they do. Because they can't go tumbling forward. So gotu kola, so the elephants in China, India, Madagascar, Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they've got a diet that's rich in the gotu kola leaves. So the memory like an elephant, that's where that comes from. There has been so much research on gotu kola that it's been part in these countries in China, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Madagascar, Bangladesh. It's part of their pharmacopoeia since the 1800s for improving memory, cognitive function. It's the best herbs for anxiety. Legend has it that elephants have long lives, and it's due to the gotu kola herb. It also helps with blood flow in the brain. It reduces swelling in the limbs, in the feet and the legs. It also, there's research where it reduces tumor growth. It strengthens the vascular wall. It prevents leakage, like in the brain or anywhere. Where, bruising. If bruising is where blood leaks out.
Right.
The wall of the vein. Okay, so gotu kola strengthens the vascular system to make that wall strong so that there is no blood leakage. And that's very, very beneficial when it comes to the central nervous system in the brain because it's a stroke preventative.
Very interesting.
When I had my stroke, I was living on ginkgo and gotu kola. I have no left pawn. It's gone.
Wow.
No left pawn.
Yeah.
It's just a black hole. Nothing there. You know, I told the doctors for 11 years. You know, I know I had a stroke. Oh, well, you know. Like, hey, you know, I'd look down and go, hey, wait a minute, why am I holding my hand like that? People who have a stroke have to do that. You know, I was hyperextending one of my legs all the time. It was just like out of the blue. And it happened where it was after my dad had died. And, you know, gotu kola is one of the best herbs for a nervous breakdown. Gotu kola. And, you know, kingdomofhealing.com, everything I've talked about is on there. You know, there's the Mind Max, there's the ginkgo gotu kola, there's the...
So, would gotu kola be good for, like, maybe somebody with Alzheimer's? Or?
Absolutely, with coconut oil and curcumin, gotu kola, ginkgo biloba as well.
Dementia as well?
Anything that, yes, ginkgo biloba. I keep saying ginkgo gotu kola because it's a formula called ginkgo gotu kola.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, lots of it. And, you know, like I said, it took them 11 years, and they finally, you know, did an MRI and went, wow, you have no left pawn. Like,
wow.
Yeah, well, hey, good thing for herbs.
Right.
Yeah, and being a naturopath, it was like, it's kind of strange. Why am I doing this? Well, yeah, I just better get shoveling for it, you know, shoveling things for it. You know, ginkgo biloba is one of the oldest living species of plants, and it's one of the most studied herbs on the planet. It's considered a living fossil. It means that the species has survived major extinction events. Ginkgo is extremely impressive enough that, you know, this plant, the trees can live as long as 1,000 years.
Wow.
They grow up to and over 120 feet tall. There's 40 different components that scientifically have been analyzed. And, you know, the flavonoids and the terpenoids are extremely important components of the actual properties of the ginkgo biloba. It protects against oxidative cell damage from harmful free radicals. So remember, if you're not getting those good oils in, hey, your oils in your body, they're going rancid. It's like that stuff in the cabinet that's been hanging out there so too long. So you'll always find it mixed with a lot of herbal brain combinations. It has antiviral properties to it as well. It helps with ginkgo as well as gotu kola. Both help with liver problems, depression, reversing eye damage, improves long-distance vision, learning disabilities, regenerates nerve tissue, regenerates brain tissue, takes care of dementia, anxiety, learning disabilities, glaucoma. There's just, it's amazing what those two herbs do. And
wow.
there's a product called Mind Max.
Okay.
And it has a specific process with the magnesium. You know, magnesium being the relaxant. Gotu kola is also a relaxant because gotu kola is used for things like incredible anxiety problems, phobias. You know, gotu kola is a relaxant. Okay, so that Mind Max has ginkgo biloba, it has gotu kola, and it has the magnesium in it. And it is wonderful food. When I had the West Nile and had the spinal meningitis and encephalitis, I was taking about 6 of those a day.
Uh-huh.
And really, a couple weeks later when I went to see the cardiologist because I had been in AFib, and he was like, "You don't even look like the same person." I can't even believe I'm talking to the same person. And he says, and all my colleagues, I told him, it's like, I don't know how this lady didn't die. And it's like, well, I will tell you, for over 30 years, I have consumed the finest nutritional supplements that you can put in your mouth worldwide. And I know that when it came to that last cell, it just wasn't going to give it up. And, and that's just like my heart. Where the other hospital, the nurse finally just jerked the plug out of the wall because, the monitor kept going off. And it's like my son said, don't you think there's something wrong with your heart? I mean, come on, the monitor keeps going. There's something wrong with the machine. She finally just rips it out of the wall. I was in AFib.
Oh, my goodness.
No wonder I didn't die.
Right?
Yeah, so, but one of the things with Gotu-Kola, there has been research with it if it's used as with an ointment, it helps to speed wound healing. It also prevents scar tissue from forming. So it's really good to use after surgeries, or if there's a lot of catheterizations of the bladder, by taking it internally, you don't get that scarring that eventually ends up happening. And so there's also been a lot of research on scleroderma, Alzheimer's disease. It's an anti-inflammatory. The French doctors use it in protocol for all liver disease. So, we look at milk thistle and realize how common, milk thistle and dandelion. Those are bitter herbs, and the liver, when it's sick, it needs bitter. It needs bitter herbs. The dandelion, the milk thistle. But French doctors, with all the research they have, it's also something that they use with reducing blood pressure, any kind of liver disease. It's used for emotional nervous breakdowns. And just like back to it with the neurologist that came in that told the other doctors if they wanted to learn anything, they had anything they wanted to know, they'd better be talking to this mother.
Well, at least that one took advantage of it. So.
And she did. And, it's... my son had a massive stroke in utero and had the brain of about a 3-month fetus. And they said that he really I should have miscarried, or he should have been born stillborn.
Wow.
And when one doctor that was over here on a fellow from Israel doing specifically studying agenesis of the corpus callosum, which is what his diagnosis was, he had CT scans up in that light box, and he gasped and put his hand over his mouth and then turned around and apologized to my mother and I for his reaction.
Wow.
But he told me, he said, "This is the most devastating CAT scan I have ever seen. I cannot believe that this child was born alive. And it's even more amazing to me that this child lived to be 12. Well, last Monday was 26 years ago I gave him back to God.
Wow.
He was 12. But that doctor said, this right here proves to me what love, faith, and nurturing will do for a human being.
Wow.
And, that is the gospel truth with what that neurologist said. And he was taking notes, and Gotu-Kola was one of the herbs that, he got every single day, and got it 3 times a day. It was in his pureed food, breakfast, lunch, and supper.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and there it was. I mean, there was proof on the CAT scan that it stopped the brain deterioration, because when I got into, it was when they told me that, hey, look, there's nothing left medically we can do. His brain is in a rapid state of deterioration. You're going to lose him within 6 months. You need to face reality. You need to plan for his funeral.
Wow.
And it was like
Devastation.
And it was like, you know what? I took my son home, and that wasn't this time. I was at the hospital because, you know, this was after I had him on herbs, and you know, he's still alive. So I was like, let's do another CT scan, see what's going on, you know, because we're a couple years down the road here, and this little boy's still alive.
Right.
You know, and that's when it's like, wow, wait a minute, what are you doing? You stop brain deterioration. So you know what? That was in like 1984.
Wow.
And now they're just now saying that the brain does regenerate. Well, you better get some gotu kola
Right?
in your diet on that one. And it was also part of, you know, his program with the, you know, with seizures. You know, so, you know, the other thing, we talked a little bit here. I think what we'll do next week is we'll continue some more on the nervous system.
Okay.
Because there is just so much that I want to share with you.
Yeah, that's
And,
interesting. So,
yeah. So, and you know, we've got our, you know, our B complex, our, you know, calcium, magnesium, the fats. You know, just remember how important the fats are. And coconut oil, lecithin, DHA. Those things are essential for a healthy, functioning nervous system. And for the women out there that are pregnant, you need to add these into your diet. You need to make sure that you are building a healthy, strong central nervous system for that baby that's developing. Because the most devastating thing that we can be told as a parent is that our child is not 100%.
right. Right.
And you know what? When the neurologist looked at me and said, look, hey, stay in med school, put him in a home, I'll never know who you are, he's going to die within a few months. You know, it was like, he could have just thrown me out that 4th floor window, and I don't think it would have fazed me.
Wow.
You know, but my attitude was just like when I was told nothing left medically could be done. I had been applying nutrition. You know, a lot was being said about nutrition. And, you know, I was doing that. But the thing is like, I'm not giving him up. I got on my knees, and it's like, I need some doors open. And, you know, coming from a big medically steeped family, it was like when people around me started talking about herbs, I mean, I got to tell you, my first reaction was, weeds? Are you crazy? Really? This child was put on phenobarbital at 26 hours old.
Wow.
Valium and Dilantin added at 3 months. But hey, he had grand mal seizures. But hey, you know what? I'm still in this field today because of a little boy who never learned to walk or talk. But I learned a lot from him. And because of that, so a lot of people have been helped because of that one little boy.
Wow.
Who would have been 38 on the 22nd.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
and
God
that's
bless
where
you
my
for,
nutrition-
you know, for all that you do, man. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a powerful testimony right there. You know?
No, he was, I say, he was my greatest teacher, and he never spoke a word.
Wow.
So, and that's where you kind of
Some-
develop that intuitiveness, you know, and, yeah, and aware of everything going on. It's a whole lot more than what we just see.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And amazing what, you know, what forms of blessings come
Yep.
in. You
Right.
know.
You know, I always said I wanted to be a surgeon so bad. But, you know, I had a child with some very major special needs. And evidently, you know, my belief is in God. He didn't want me to be a surgeon. He had another way to use me. And it was through that way I had this special child. And it was through that special child I got down, I found the path that he wanted me on. And that's been my path my whole adult life. So, and it will be until the day I don't wake up.
Well, I know we're honored that you're sharing your knowledge with us. That's for sure. You know. So.
Well, you all have a really great week, and next week we'll continue some more on the nervous system, because There's a lot to learn, and we'll go through more of the immune system. So
Right.
help
So
to
one more time,
understand that.
the websites where they can find everything.
Kingdomofhealing.com, and you know, they have on there where you can become a member, like you know, you can get a member card at Costco or whatever, you know. $40 usually is the member fee. However, if you order $40 worth of product, the member fee is free. There is no membership fee. It's
Okay.
free. And so every year, as you know, I mean, you put in at least a $40 order that renews your membership. And that allows you to buy the product at direct wholesale.
And those are good discount prices, let me tell you, because I do order, or I have ordered, and I do plan on ordering more, and that membership cost is worth it. So,
Yeah. And I got to tell you, you know, there's a lot of companies out there. This is a company that's been around for 42 years. And, excuse me, I stand corrected. 1970. So, you know, the thing is 45 years now. And this company, the money that is spent in quality control testing, in-house testing, they test every single thing, raw material that goes into the in-house manufacturing. There's none of this. You don't get any bottles that say manufactured for.
right.
They don't have anybody manufacture anything for them.
Wow.
They in-house manufacture it. And, you know, the quality control testing, go to kingdomofhealing.com. Click on that on the quality control testing. You will be impressed. Multi-million-dollar laboratory.
Wow.
Scientists working there, you know, making sure that, you know what, I have always joked that a lot of these companies that have come along the way, when they grow up, they want to be a Nature Sunshine.
Right on.
You know,
Well,
when
hey,
they
there's
grow
a
up.
good goal.
Yeah,
It's a good goal.
You know, that's a good goal. But over 600 products, and I'll tell you, there's just been so many people over the years that I've been able to help with that product line. It's incredible, and there's a lot of products out there. And yeah, I've tried other things, but you know what? When you got the best, that's what you go back to. Because when people come to you and they're sick, you don't have time.
Right.
You do not have time to wonder if this new product that somebody's telling you about is really going to work.
True.
So people are sick, and like I've said before, when you help one person get well, you not only help that person, you help to heal a whole family.
Right.
Because everybody has someone that loves them, and everybody has someone that your life is never the same when you lose them.
That's true.
So, you know what? This company, I guarantee you, and I promise you, you don't get any better. You just don't get any better.
Well.
You'll have a great week, and we'll be back next week. And thank you for being with us today on Kingdom Healing. Take care and God bless.
Right on. Bye-bye.